want to show you another feature of this concretized gypsum, which may end up being a clue to who the ancients were, okay? Now this is a feature that I've seen in Croatia, throughout the Croatian hills in Rijeka, and throughout Texas gypsum concrete terraforming, okay? So we know this is terraforming, okay? 45-degree line. We have the seams, we have the insistent seams, the smooth section faces, so we know this is terraforming, okay? We know it's concrete, laid down by the ancients. Always we find these vertical, always vertical, 100% of the time, worm-like traces in the concrete. Now, what are those vertical worm-like traces? What is that? So here we have a really interesting example of this bizarre scalloping. And it's sort of finger-shaped scalloping here. 1, 2, 3. But it's not quite fingers that are doing it, it seems, because then it comes up and it comes to a V right there. A finger wouldn't leave a V, right? It could, but it doesn't seem quite like a finger. But these are finger-shaped valleys everywhere you look in this. This is just a particularly clear example of it. You can see the silhouette of these scalloped ridges. The ridges alongside the valleys are very sharp. Very, very, very sharp. You can almost cut yourself on how sharp they are. I mean, this material is really hard. This is material in the hills above the Adriatic Sea in Rijeka, Croatia. And this is really incredible material here that composes this hill and composes all the hills around here. It's the same material. And it's exactly the same material as we find in the hill country in Texas, centering around Kerrville, Texas. Exactly the same. I've spent a lot of time there, many days looking at that geology. And this is the exact same geology as in Kerrville, Texas. And you see this always in Kerrville, you see this scalloping, these interesting sort of finger-sized valleys with these sharp ridges next to them, and they're always going up, as if some organism were crawling up, and then some worm, when it was soft, crawled up. And you say, well, if it was an organism that made those, if this was naturally formed material, then you wouldn't have these hard, really solidly sharp and hard ridges, because the material would have been soft enough that it wouldn't have suddenly hardened to this ridge overnight. All of them wouldn't have just suddenly hardened to a sharp ridge. It wouldn't have made sense. They would have been softened over time if they were going to harden naturally. And so you have to wonder how they stayed so sharp, you know? And then you start to think, well, maybe this isn't naturally formed material after all. Maybe this material was laid down. And then you ask yourself more questions. You say, well, why do we find channels? In other words, why do we find sections in the material? Like this. And you say, oh, well, it broke apart over the years, or really, broke apart? Or, so there's one section. So there's on the left, and then on the right, you see it sort of channeled and all the way down. And then here, another channel. It doesn't look like it broke apart, because we find the same worm-like, finger-like channeling ridging on this and on this. In other words, it's not like this broke off of this. This was channeled with these finger marks, whatever you want to call them, and so was this. So these were apart for thousands or millions of years. Why is there a channel here? Why does the channel go all the way there? Everywhere you look, there's sections, and it's the same way in Bosnia, it's the same way in South Africa. You see them building in sections, and the sections usually, well, the sections in Bosnia and South Africa that I've seen always have smooth sides. Now these are not smooth, but they are rather regular, aren't they? I mean, they're not perfectly smooth, but they're pretty regular, right? Pretty regular. Everywhere you see channels, sections. So we keep asking ourselves questions. If you really look at it, if you take time to look at it and use your brain and your eyes together, it's a rare thing in science, but it should be the rule in science, but scientists don't seem to do that. They just take the orthodoxical view, which is total nonsense on the face of it. Everywhere you look, there's evidence against the orthodoxical view. So then we have to ask ourselves, if this wasn't formed naturally, and then again, also, if the exact similar geology in the Kerrville, Texas area, in the hill country as they call it, wasn't formed naturally, then who formed it? Who laid it down in sections? Is the question. Again, we find these interesting worm-like or finger-like marks, always vertical, in this terraformed concrete. These marks may be the clue to the ancient's identity. And I've seen literally tens of thousands of examples of these in Texas. Thousands of examples of exactly the same thing in Croatia, in the Rijeka area, in the concrete hills of Rijeka, and I've documented those extensively. And we see these interesting malformations of the concrete everywhere we go. So it's mixed with modeling, so there's this, but you can see, especially right there, you can see the finger-like marks, especially right there, the finger-like marks, okay? So I'm going to get some photos and we're going to figure out who these people were, or this race, okay?